So let's start with the obvious question. Who's funnier? Drew.
Oh, I think, I don't think either one is. I think you just have to make fun of, make sure you're making fun of your targets right and getting laughs. I don't think there is a funnier left or right, honestly. I don't think there's an answer to the question.
Can I follow up on that?
By all means.
Can I just sort of steal it? Sure. Do you mean who's funnier to mock or who is funnier at mocking?
To mock. Let's start with to mock.
Who is more mockable?
Yes.
I think the right is more mockable because they're higher status. And, you know, it's always more fun to attack the guy on top. And right now, the Republicans control the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch, so there's hardly another game in town. The only reason anyone's attacking the Democrats is because they're sticking their neck out for the campaign. If there wasn't a political campaign, you wouldn't hear about the Democrats from politicians, from comedians probably at all, because, well, they're not puffing themselves up.
They're not doing anything.
They're not doing anything.
Yeah. They're dull.
Well, Phil, jump
My
in.
microphone's not working. Is it there? They're dull. They're not doing anything.
You support President Bush.
I do, and I'm a Democrat who supports President Bush. But I only support President Bush because, and I'll tell you why.
No booing. No booing.
And I anticipated that response. First of all, I think the Democrats are hysterical. But really, it's not the Democrats. It's sort of the liberal tree hug, whatever you want to call it. They're a riot. I mean, I do a character on my show named Dean Wheeler, who is a real pansy ass when it comes to. First of all, I'm a Democrat who believes that it's okay to own a gun. I think it's in the Constitution that we can. In fact, in the world we live today, you're an idiot if you are a responsible citizen and you don't have a gun in your home. If you are responsible, why is that a boo? It's in the Constitution. You may have it. You look at your wife or your daughter being pistol whipped in front of your very eyes. You wouldn't reach for a gun?
Okay, Phil. This panel is who's funnier, the left or
you
the
wouldn't
right.
reach for a gun?
So no.
Hey, this is a comedy show, and I'm going to keep making it funny here. Now let's talk about your wife and daughter getting pistol whipped. Let's reach for a gun.
There is really nothing funnier than your wife or daughter being pistol whipped. I have to agree with Phil on
You know
that
what?
one.
On second thought, I wouldn't reach for a gun. I'd get a video camera.
Yeah. You could reach for a Pop-Tart or a drink as
Something
well.
like that,
Hey, let's sit back and enjoy this pistol whipping.
Hey, what am I?
Gosh, I wish I had a gun right now. I wish I'd had the prescience to be a fascist and have a gun.
A fascist? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. What the hell? Let my wife die. I don't want to be a fascist.
I'd like to apologize for taking the question away.
Yeah, why the hell did you start?
You were doing a very good job, and I apologize.
I can't get. I'm so tired. Yeah, whoever is puffed up, and Democrats are puffed. A lot of Democrats and liberals are really like self-righteous, and we're here to save you, and they have that vibe going, and that's easy to make fun of because you can knock them down real easy. And so many Republicans are like, oh, we know it's moral, and you don't, and we're going to protect you and your family. You can knock them down real easy because they're so fucking.
Yeah, but you know, isn't comedy mostly about like attacking, you know, the status quo? Isn't comedy it basically have a liberality to it?
Pistol whipping the status quo. I want to get back to that.
Or shooting them while they do
Yeah, exactly. While the status quo is beating your wife and daughter.
I know, but you always want to attack people that are higher you or think they're higher than you.
Right.
So that's a lot of liberals and a lot of conservatives who think they're
Right.
better than everybody else in the country because they're so paternal in their attitudes. So good, I love to knock those people down.
Yeah, I think satire has always been this kind of disorganized resistance to establish power centers. I mean, if you go back a few hundred years, the court jester pulled the king's beard. He didn't go out and randomly criticize the serfs. There was
Going town to town, giving crap to the serfs.
Can I ask if the queen
He
was
would go
being
down to town
axe
and
whipped
pistol
at that point? Or sword whipped or anything like that?
We may be
I
recreating
think
that
this is why,
society.
this is why Dennis Miller, I think, has had trouble getting a little traction. Is that what's he going to do? He's going to go after the Democrats. These guys are so not in power. That's very amusing. They are so not screwing up the world the way the Republicans are right now. There's no.
I think there's some truth to that. I mean, the bigger you are.
Yeah, but don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. It's
They
coming.
will.
It's coming.
Yeah.
Where do we meet Mrs. Carey? I guarantee you, comic goldmine. I I agree actually with what Drew said. It's equivalent. There's a certain absurdity inherent in all politics. And the closer you get to any politician, you can find just a little tinge of that insanity or weirdness that makes it funny. And when you're in the White House, you're the king of the heap, you're the most interesting person to focus on. And I think satire does have that kind of that interest in challenging those who are powerful. But now that the primaries are over, and we're getting to the real thing, I think there's going to be an elevation of Carey, and I think they'll both be interesting and funny, and they're both easy to make fun of.
Well, let's get specific. What exactly is funny about John Kerry?
The guy is a target-rich environment for comics. I mean, he's so stiff, you sort of picture him sitting at home wearing a powdered wig, watching C-SPAN 2. I mean, he told one of my colleagues at Time that he actually thought of himself as a rebel. I mean, for John Kerry, being rebellious is having red wine with fish. So when he gets elevated, we'll have our shots.
Well, don't you think there would be real parity in this election in that sense? That both these guys.
Yeah. John Kerry doesn't stand for anything. I mean, that's right there. That's mockable. He doesn't stand for a thing. He's just anti-Bush, which is why the Democrats really. I'm so ashamed of my party because it's an anti-Bush party. It doesn't stand for a bloody thing. Now, pistol whipping.
The president's war on English. The president's war on English is a fair talk.
Yeah, how about that? This is good, yeah. But the John Kerry makeover, you can't beat that. Well, yeah, you can.
But you're right. For Bush to try to shed his patrician roots,
what's great about what Bush does is he makes fun of his own problem. Like he does on Saturday Night Live, he makes jokes about it all the time, and right away you forgive it. Right. You know what I mean?
No, right away you forgive it. I think you'll find he's not quite as self-effacing and a man of the people as some people might imagine.
I'm still waiting for Bush to make a self-effacing joke about executing the retarded.
Yeah.
Then I'll really respect
But that's funny. That's funny.
It's not like they fucked a retarded guy off the street and go, "We're going to shoot you." He's a murderer.
It's not like they retarded him. It just happened.
I know. The guy was a murderer.
Now, if the retarded person had been a bird, then he would have definitely shot
Well,
it.
when the retarded guy kills somebody in your family, we'll see if you change your tune.
Let me shift.
I'm looking forward to it.
Now, what if the retarded person is
Send him right to Phil's house, eliminate the middleman.
Let me try to bring us back sort of to the subject matter. John Podesta, you were in the White House during the Clinton-Lewinsky period, where late-night comedians were having a field day. Were you watching? Were you able to find humor in this moment? Or were you too close to it?
Well, I actually don't think Letterman and Leno had anything on our 7:45 staff meeting, really, in the morning. And I watched Anderson Cooper get himself really in trouble talking about oral sex yesterday, so I think I'm going to avoid going down that path and just leave it to the imagination. But I think that I'd say two things about it, really. One is having humor in the White House leavened the situation, made people have the capacity to actually go do their job because they could laugh about it a little on the inside. But I do think it robbed the president of something that Drew mentioned with regard to President Bush, which is it robbed him of the ability to use humor. You couldn't go from his grand jury testimony onto Leno and start joking around about it. And so there was a period probably for a year in which I think President Clinton had a harder time actually using humor, which he was so good at during the other parts of his tenure.
It did take away a very important tool out of his toolkit. He just had to stop. It was impossible for him to as you say, go on any of these shows and make fun of himself. And this is that's what those clips that we just looked at were all about. Is these guys trying to buy themselves some immunity?
But for comedians, can anything match the Clinton era in terms of material?
I think the assassination of John Kennedy was a gold mine. And from there, we have civil rights, Vietnam, Nixon, please.
We also had Dan Quayle at one point, and that was fairly fresh. I'll tell you. You can recycle those Dan Quayle jokes and make them W jokes, and it's awesome.
You just
How come we allow, though, obviously it was so funny that Clinton had a sexual incident and that was endlessly entertaining, and yet all the things that Bush has done, people go, hey, you still have to respect the office and all that. I hear that all the time. And crowds go, ooh, if you make fun of
What
them.
did he do?
Sorry?
What did he do?
George W. Bush, aside from deceiving...
Other than go to war? What?
Oh, other than...
I'm a big fan, as you know.
Other than pistol
I'm a huge fan of violence.
Pistol whipping the Iraqis.
Matt,
I
Matt,
think
you were
that's
going to
what
say
it is.
something.
You bring up guns and everybody's like scared. Come on.
Not in Colorado, they're not.
That's good. Apparently these people are.
Matt,
Wait.
I think
Cooper.
we'll all concede there's nothing as funny as pistol
Are you doing an
whipping.
impression?
By the way, Campbell, you are lovely.
So wait,
Why did I call on you?
I think President Clinton should have just claimed that having sex with an intern was a joke. I just said, don't you get it? I had sex with an intern in the Oval Office. It's hilarious. I guess I'm just too hip for the room.
Where was Stephen when we needed him?
Mike Murphy,
Yes.
you have advised and worked for natural performers, Schwarzenegger, John McCain, who could use
Sure.
humor very successfully. You've also worked for some real stiffs.
Absolutely.
So, what do you say
They
to
prefer
these
to be
guys?
called governor or senator, but
How do you teach them to be funny, to
drugs and
loosen up?
alcohol. No,
you're doing a good job.
yeah, so far. There's actually a true story. Once the Senate candidate was actually doped up for a statewide debate by the media advisor, not me, who was nervous and, unbeknownst to the candidate, doped up the water glass on the podium. Oh, it's one of the secrets I'll have to die with. And no longer in office. Lost
He has
that election.
Alzheimer's.
Yeah, right, exactly. No, the truth is the worst thing you can do is take an unfunny person and try to make them funny, because they'll never be good at it. And that's a mistake I think they might make with Carey. Kind of get him off Easter Island, and try to make him human. It's going to be hard. I think Drew made a good point earlier. The president is aware that he's awful funny to a lot of people, and I think he will do self-deprecating things all the way through. But if you have an unfunny person, you don't try to make him funny. You go self-serious. We don't need a clown in the White House or in the Senate or in the city council or whatever. Serious times demand this boring character.
But why do we expect this from our politicians now? It's almost a rite of passage that they have to go on Leno, that they have to do the Daily Show.
Pop culture rules everything now. I mean, look at Arnold. Who would have thunk it?
Well, I had a nightmare about it before it happened, but there you are.
Yeah, Lou Ferrigno's getting ideas now. We're a little worried.
When I see Oklahoma stand up and nominate Jean-Claude Van Damme as their governor, then I'll
Yeah, I'll
know.
tell you, there's a difference. I'll tell you, somebody was behind the scenes on the Arnold thing. I went in with low expectations, and I was very impressed with the guy. He's somebody who knows what the underplay is and to always be underestimated. And he's been underestimated all the way to the top of Hollywood with an unpronounceable name and now to the largest governorship in the country. So, but I do think pop culture has become so important in politics that those of us who are going out running political campaigns would much rather go put the candidate there where there's quick, wide publicity and acceptance than sit in the Tim Russert hot seat and have to do, trigonometry on Sunday morning. So, pop culture is so powerful, we go there.
I think it was just Bush that made it look like trigonometry. It was actually a simple mathematical question. All that stuff, where is it? Someone took it, a shadowy figure took it to another country or something. I'm gonna go pistol whip in Iraqi.
Hey, Phil, let me ask you, because you have very definite opinions.
Yes,
Do you think that comedy, using comedy, polarizes Americans? I mean, are you, in a sense, when you talk to your audience, are you preaching to the choir, or are you humanizing?
Probably. I mean, we probably all are. If people come to see you or people tune you in, obviously they feel or think the way you do. Although, I do comedy and then I do commentary, and I do piss off people when I suddenly start talking about stuff. They'd rather hear me do funny voices, But polarize people? No, because I can do a bit where this character, I have a Dean Wheeler who is this liberal Northern California imbecile, and even Democrats think he's a riot because they recognize him. There's a guy like that. So if you can get away with a lot if you just learn to do voices, which may be something that John Kerry can do. President Bush, you know.
If you put on a stovepipe hat, he could be do Lincoln.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Kerry won't have that opportunity, but oh boy, I didn't hear that gas escaping like I did the last time I said pistol whip. So you are preaching to the choir. If you throw a zinger at them, they will get kind of upset with you if they don't recognize it. Go ahead, Drew.
So the only problem, regarding your question, the only problem I have with like people that call themselves like political comedians is they count like a woo or an applause as a laugh. You know, so if they get the crowd who say they're a liberal and they have a room full of liberals and they go, Bush is a shithead. And you know, and then everybody goes, woo, yeah. And then they're backstage and they go, man, I really killed. My Bush comments. You know, you have to be funny no matter who you're making fun of, you know. And if you're funny when people that support the guy you're making fun of can laugh at it. So that's the only rule. And it doesn't have to be polarizing. Otherwise, it is polarizing. If you're just up there bashing and not trying to be funny about it, and you're counting noise as laughter, then so what?
And well, Stephen? That was a good effort. We know how much sleep you got.
It's 9:30.
But Stephen, the Daily Show is pretty much an equal opportunity sort of.
We just want to heal through laughter. trying to heal the rift of the 2000 campaign, which, by the way, is a better story than anything could ever be. Yeah. Like, what's funnier than Clinton having sex with interns? The 2000 campaign. It was important to everyone, and no one died.
Gary, let me ask you, because
you did right now.
I didn't mean to interrupt my big moment. Wait, I'm ready to shine.
Do you want to take another?
I don't know.
No, okay. No.
I think that the whole idea of being an equal opportunity satirist is kind of a contradiction in terms. So that sort of person is more accurately described as a humorist, and that's generally what happens on the late night shows. Is that they'll, as you say, they play to one part of the audience and they play to another, and there's never a sense on the part of someone like Leno that there's ever anything at stake. This is all in good fun. If you don't like the joke, we'll move on to the next one. And I think most good satire comes from a point of view. And most of the guys working in late night don't actually have a point of view, which is fine. That's what they do. They're entertainers. And, but if you're shooting a little bit higher, if you're actually trying to illuminate through satire in some way, as pretentious as that probably sounds, it helps if you have a strong point of view, so that as you mow down everything, there's something left standing.
And we should point out that you do, and have gotten a lot of mileage out of this president, yeah?
Out of this president? Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, in my business, he's considered the gold standard, and we would be crushed if he lost. I mean, I've been running this little contest in the strip to offering $10,000 for someone to come forward and all the trolling for trash that people have been using to try to establish where Bush was in the summer of '72. I haven't found any witnesses, but most people say, well, why on earth would you want to put $10,000 at risk? And for me, basically, I've got cash to burn now. One of the unintended consequences, part of the blowback of Bush's campaign to, this give back to the great unneedy is that people like me are now fat cats. And I've been just spraying money out on the whole field. Everywhere. I mean, I must be a ranger or a centurion or one of those summer camp praetorian by now. But Bush, I mean, I would never give, even though it's in my interest to have someone like Bush win. How can you give money to an organization that has raised $140 million? The waste and fraud over at the committee to re-elect now is appalling. They have spent $40 million, and they've only just wheeled the attack machinery into position this week. So it's shocking.
It's terrible. It's just.
I thought you might have something to say.
I'm a Democrat now. Okay, I'm back in the fold. I just because we don't do that, do we? No, we don't. We don't steal. We don't cheat. We don't lie. We don't kill.
And
But I do.
Lyndon Johnson was the most honest president ever.
Yes. Yes. Indeed.
God bless you guys.
God bless him. God rest his soul.
I'm glad we're debating Lyndon Johnson. Let's, Woodrow Wilson once said, that bastard, fuck the League of Nations.
Totally failed president.
Ridiculous.
Can't act like the
Let me
Republicans.
say something about Warren G. Harding.
Hey, wait a minute.
Wait,
What, corruption?
Yeah, attack machine. Look what they did to Bob
Advantages
Dole.
this year.
Bob Dole. God bless Bob Dole. He got nominated, and then boom, 100. Well, not 100. Actually, John might know. A lot of millions of dollars of this guy wants to destroy Social Security. Just clobbered him all summer long. Beat him to death. I mean, it's the way American politics is played. You all love it because you're rewarded every day at the ballot box. But the idea that there's a Republican attack machine versus a Democrat one is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's
You
just
get
attacks
better,
work.
that's all.
Well, we're hoping.
Or at least better greased.
Well, we're seeing. We're seeing.
If I could make just another stupid point here, it's that the Republicans and Democrats, both sides believe in big government.
It's the same party.
But
Wake
they,
up.
but it's that
There's no difference to
they're both big government machines.
Jesus
The
Christ.
Democratic Party, the only reason why I'm disillusioned, and here I'll bring up another name that we may remember. I used to consider myself a Roosevelt Democrat, meaning we could care about people and still go out and kick some ass. Now we're a party of people who just, whatever the Republicans are, we're not. But Republicans are into...
whipping go.
Well, you guys are kidding, but I'm telling you, it's a reality. It's a freaking reality.
Stop kidding.
You know,
Comedy festival.
here's the whole thing.
Stop it.
That's why the Democratic Party is not going to win in the fall, because we really can't take anything too seriously with this party anymore. And you got to look at it. And the fact of the matter is we are in a violent world, and I don't know why it is we suddenly sort of wimped out on certain issues. But both sides are big government sides. Republicans believe in large expenditures with regard to perhaps military, etc. The Democrats believe in large expenditures with regard to buying votes, i.e., whatever popular program there is for Head Start. And it's a vote buying, it is a vote buying thing. It's a total vote buying thing. Because how many of those programs have been effective? Somebody.
well, we've got
Okay,
John
that's
Podesta
one.
right
Give me
here.
another one.
He can answer that.
Give me another
question.
one.
Playing the Moscow Improv here, man. Any Republicans in this room at all? No. Arrested at the gate. Yeah.
We got Head Start, and then it kind of goes quiet. He's just getting material for John. Don't worry about it.
That's it.
We've lost
You
Stephen.
write the show?
Stephen, question for you. Do shows, and Drew, this will work for you too. Do you have, if you're doing political humor, do you have a responsibility? Do you have any responsibility to be?
Next question.
Just to be all you have to do, if you're doing political humor and you're charging people for a comedy show, you have a responsibility to be funny. I don't want to hear your freaking speech, about that. To me, there's a mentioned humorist. A comic is one that gets laughs. A humorist is one that gets, oh yeah, I agree with you, and applause. When people.
I get
when people,
you, man.
I get you. So that's the only responsibility is to get laughs. If people laugh at it, they know it's true. They acknowledge it. You're not throwing any firebombs or talking about anything somebody doesn't know about if they're laughing at it.
But how do you deal with what John said initially, which is, I can't remember the percentage of people who are now getting their news believing The Daily Show is news.
I actually don't really believe that statistic, because I don't think they would come watch the show if they didn't have some idea what the news was already. Because they wouldn't get the joke. We don't educate them that much. We assume a certain amount of information about a subject before we make the joke. And if they didn't watch the mass media, they also would sort of miss half the joke, because half of our joke is mocking the way the news is reported, not just what the news is. So I'm very skeptical of that statistic, which is thrown around all the time now, because it's somehow shocking or
There are also people
something.
who probably aren't going to want more news than they're going to get at the Daily Show anyway. I mean, there's a good percentage of them who aren't going to go that deep. On the Today Show, the Tonight Show, they used to say that they could build a joke on the headline, maybe the subhead, never the lead, and certainly not in the body of the story. That it had to be something you saw passing a newsstand.
How do you know what was going on at the stage?
I'm more concerned about how many kids can't read. You know, how many people can't name their congressman or name their senator.
They watched the Daily Show.
There was I forget the comic's name right now, but he was a guitar. He wasn't a guitar, but he had the whole audience sing the Gilligan's Island theme. Like, come on, let's sing. And then he would had him sing Brady Bunch theme.
Yeah.
And then he would say, "Okay, who's your congressman?" And nobody knew. Nobody knew.
Drew,
Outside
who's
this
congressman?
room, Harry Waxman.
Good for you.
Yeah.
And look at the crestfallen disappointment with which he says it. Henry Waxman, that tax and spend liberal, he doesn't want to kick ass. I'm a Roosevelt person myself, except I'm a Teddy Roosevelt person. I believe in walking softly and hitting people and pistol whipping them with a big stick. I'd like to go back to something Stephen said because I have a joke for it. The 2000 election was a remarkably funny event, and for those very reasons. And I was surprised that after that election, Haiti didn't invade us to install a democracy. Phil's points are also well taken, however inconceivably and irretrievably misguided and wrong they are. The idea that we're not kicking ass enough is in itself unbelievably ridiculous, since ass has been kicked all over the world in the last year. I don't know how much more ass we can kick without running out of money to kick ass with.
We've got more.
Yeah, we've got more.
We have more.
Yeah, don't worry, because the rich people are hoarding theirs, and I'll be happy.
The ass you don't kick today gets bigger tomorrow, so you have to.
That's why we quit supersizing.
That is the world
How is it that the Democrats came to be associated with no ass kicking? The Democrats started every major war in the 20th century. Big, brawny, muscular wars that cost millions of dollars, that required sacrifices on the part of the country.
Yeah,
the Republican wars were these stunt wars. There were Spanish-American War, the Grenada, let's find somebody easy to beat up on and let's go in.
That's what Republicans do, as you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. The history of the last 110 years has been
Is that Republicans go in and beat up on weaklings and Democrats go in and beat up?
Yeah. So how did it come to be that?
Well,
the
why don't we get
Democrats
Carey in there and we can invade China?
It's just one of those things that Republicans repeat over and over
Carey in and
again.
invade China.
They forever saying that Democrats are wimps and that Democrats are tax and spend, whereas this administration spent more than. If God had this budget, he couldn't spend as much money as these Republicans are spending. And
there was a little thing called bailing out United Airlines in New York City. It was
which I disagreed with. Why should the airlines get any money?
Foreign terrorism thing that got popped up.
Yeah,
But let's talk about that for a second, about how things become conventional wisdom when you talk about them a lot. Example being, I think, Howard Dean's campaign ended because of one speech.
That's not true.
he was so unelectable from the very start.
All right, okay, all that
Insane,
fair.
and people finally figured it out.
But it was crystallized in one moment, which was the speech in Iowa that was then replayed
He was never going to be elected. You're wrong.
He had a bad month.
The media thought that guy was bigger than he was. Everybody in Time Magazine and Newsweek thought he was bigger than he was. He was never speaking for the mainstream.
Okay,
and
but
as soon as he got his ass kicked in Iowa, or pistol whipped in Iowa.
But if you're not paying close attention to politics and watching the returns come in on cable news during the Iowa or New Hampshire primaries, your only familiarity with that might have been the late night talk shows replaying Howard Dean's speech. Fair?
If you're completely insane on television and running for president, it's okay to get in trouble for it, I think. The guy unscrewed his head on national TV.
He'd already lost the election. So how could the speech of the people he'd already lost? So what do you mean that speech did it? People already knew the guy sucked.
Well, no, he'd already lost one caucus, and the Iowa caucus has never really been that great of a bellwether. And the fact that the speech did something that politicians try to do to each other, which is there's been a lot of talk lately about Carey's got to get out there with his money because the Republicans are going to define him like they defined Dukakis in 1988. And that's the one effect I think that late night comedy can have on a candidate, which sometimes the opponent of a candidate can't, which is to define the person's personality, to define their character, like Al Gore sighing and Lockbox, and I think the way that Carey is being described as this sort of stentorian, very dull person is going to be something that everyone seems to be picking up on. So that's the definition of his character now. And when that speech got played over and over and over again, and there was no reason for the news to do it other really than for comic effect, because it was fucking hilarious to watch. You didn't have to do anything that it defined him, whether or not, really even whether it was fair. It could have been a single thing that was not in line with anything else it did. It probably was in line, but if it had been isolated, it would have defined him.
Howard Dean's a psycho. You could see it in his eyes. They interviewed him, and they widened out. And Jesus, I wanted to kick his ass.
When comics define you, when somebody makes fun of you, when somebody makes fun of, even personally, if somebody ever makes fun of you, they're pointing out a truth that maybe whether you want to acknowledge that truth or not. When they point to you and say, hey, your hair is black, you know, they know what everybody else knows, and they're telling you, and that's why everybody laughs, because nobody will laugh at something if it's not true. So, he is dull.
2 + 2 = 4.
Dean's defense.
Hilarious.
Dean's defense.
5, not funny.
You can't define a candidate more than what he is. It's not like they're making up stuff about a candidate and it's sticking to them. You can't do anything about it. They're just pointing out something true about
something of absolutely no substance or importance whatsoever.
Right.
But if Howard Dean,
But they're going for laughs.
if Howard Dean had a message that was resonating with people, they wouldn't have abandoned that man the way they did. I mean, he just got pistol whipped, ass whipped, whatever you want to call it.
Wait,
Dean's defense, of course, was to go to late night television and try to be funny. But it did, you know, he couldn't put a tourniquet on the wound once it was bleeding. It was too late.
I mean, it's logarithmic because when you're kind of a puppy candidate of 4%, you're allowed to be a lunatic. It's interesting. You get to 12% being a lunatic. Yeah, and entertaining. But when you become the front runner, when all of a sudden you're on the on-deck circle of the Oval Office, everything changes about the way you're viewed. And when you are the guy who's hot and you get in trouble, and the whole country watches to see how you handle that, and you go ape on national television, it ends. And it doesn't matter whether it's the first caucus or the fourth one. He had 150 attempts to come back. Remember, he kept in the race, on and on. He was over. Nobody wanted to vote for him. And all late night television does is magnify what's true, whatever the foible is.
Gary had a great point. If I could say, Gary, you're absolutely right. Satire comes from a point of view. And the late night guys are just equal opportunity general kind of, you know, Leno, I have no idea how that man stands on anything. I just know that whoever's the president, he's making fun of him. And you know what? I don't know that really serves people. Oh, maybe that's good if you're going to grab your news. You can see what's funny about each person. But ultimately, I think satirists are better at highlighting things, specific things about one side or the other.
Well, I think you're right, because if you don't talk from a place of passion, then you just sound like politicians themselves.
Right.
Because you're just telling the audience, you just tell the audience what they want to hear anyway. And maybe they'll laugh, but they'll laugh in the flippant way that Drew was talking about. You know, jokes like Ted Kennedy, enough said. You know, there's no joke there. But it's funny.
And the Lewinsky stuff.
Quit applauding those people if you ever see
I'll tell you another thing too. This stuff gets beaten into the ground. The Clinton thing got beat into the ground, man. It was like the most freaking unfunny thing going, you know, after a while.
Yeah, the one bad thing about the Clinton jokes stuff, there was all the same joke over and over, and you're like, come on, man, write some new stuff.
Yeah, it was like the bargain bin at Target. It's like all picked over. That's the problem with Schwarzenegger, and that was the problem with the first 9 months of Bush. It was like, oh, we're going to make fun of that he says nuclear again.
It's all personality driven. I mean, there's very little comedy that sort of goes after the media, and as a member of the media, I know it's a rich target. You know, there's very little that goes after corporate life and, you know, commercialism and things.
But don't you think the one thing that is possibly problematic from the standpoint of late night TV ratifies those truths that you were talking about. Yeah. They ratify, but those truths sometimes can be introduced into the conversation laterally. That I mean, let's face it. Al Gore had a lot of problems, but it wasn't, lying really wasn't one of them. And yet that became the narrative. That became the narrative, and then it became easy then for late night to ratify that, to put another layer on top of it.
Oh, to say like he invented the internet and all that stuff?
Yeah. And Love Canal, like that story.
I mean, the lies...
He discovered Love Canal.
No, I mean, if you look at each one of those stories, they got pretty twisted around.
That's my point. That story, if you listen to what he said, He's not claiming that he discovered Love Canal.
And
Sarah Vowell talked about this in her book, The Partly Cloudy Patriot. If you look at what his speech was, what the Washington Post said about it, and then I believe there was even a retraction about the report that the Post had about how he had said that he had found Love Canal, but it was too late. It was too late. It had been
And
picked up
meanwhile,
as a
Bush is
joke.
telling huge lies.
Right. Well,
You know, from an environmental standpoint, Texas is the place to be. But because his narrative is that he's stupid, everyone says, well, you know, he
just doesn't know.
He's not
He
sure what he's
doesn't know what he's saying.
Don't worry, they don't give him the big football with the suitcase thing. Someone else holds that.
If you look at the Saturday Night Live clip, which is very funny, where he's sort of a likable imbecile in that portrait of him, but they mention that he has this tax scheme, but you know that's never the subject for humor at the time. I mean,
But of course, that can't work against the current narrative. So his challenge, I think, to do humor in the new narrative, the one that's coming forward in his campaign ads, is I think a much tougher deal. Unless, you know, is he going to go out and make fun of the price Halliburton's charging for hamburgers in Kuwait? You know, he just can't get to it. Because his image now, I don't know whether Mike agrees with this, his image is not one of being stupid, but one of being, you know, the father to us all. And I think that's a harder place to do humor from, actually.
Yeah, and somebody said a moment ago that Bush appears likable. That's golden politics. Because the average person is not that interested in going down to the library and figuring out the intricacies of the Budget Act or buying the crap in Mother Jones like it's true. So what happens instead is they pick somebody, I just want to wake you up a little, comrades. So what they do instead is they pick somebody they like who seems to have some experience and they trust. And I disagree about Gore. Nobody threw Gore out of office because they thought he lied about the internet. They thought he was a robot. That's what they didn't like about Gore. Yeah. And so it...
About the internet.
Yeah, exactly. I am. So, as long as they think the president is somebody they like, somebody they trust, and somebody who's a leader and can make a decision, and is on their side, for most of them.
Then how does Bush fit any of those things? It's clear he couldn't make a decision without Dick Cheney's hand up his ass.
Well, don't be trashing President Cheney.
You know, this whole father
See,
to
I
us
tell
all
you,
thing.
the problem you guys have, just to be a political consultant for you on there for a minute, is that kills in about 4 zip codes. But the other 300 are like behind it.
Well, honey, I play all over the world and it kills everywhere. And I just...
One of the problems, one of the real problems we got, especially living in Los Angeles or Hollywood, where Greg and I live, I don't know where the rest of you guys are, but the view of
I love it. I suggest you live there too.
well, I can tell you,
This.
I can tell you, good. Yeah, get John out here. This attitude is not out there in the country. It's not.
It's out there for.
It's not.
It's out there for half plus 500,000.
That's the one
This whole idea that everyone loves Bush and it's right in it.
Get over the half thing.
I'll take more than half. How about that?
What's the last president that got elected with 50%, over 50% of the popular votes? Who was it?
Around Reagan, 84.
Warren G. Harding.
See, over your half, and that was only the people that bothered to go out and vote.
Right. This is not an attitude that's reflected in America. That's why they got fooled with Howard Dean. That's what they thought this guy was really something, and he turned out to be, nobody cared. Nobody wanted to listen to this guy. He wasn't going to be anybody's president. John Kerry won't get elected president for a couple of reasons. One, people are going to look at this guy.
Yeah, exactly.
They're going to look at this guy. They're going to look at this guy.
Write this down.
And here it is.
Down.
Here it is.
Write it down. The truth is coming down from the mountain. I see the beams.
John Kerry will not get elected president.
Go ahead.
Because they're going to whip this. They're going to whip this out. They're going to whip this out in probably September or so. That John Kerry stood before the Senate and called his fellow soldiers rapists and murderers back in 1971. Guy's not going to make it. Nobody at this time in the history of this country.
You may be right.
Can I just point out something?
And he
That
pissed me what the hell.
no matter what your opinion is, he just defined you for everybody in the room.
Phil, let me give you a chance
In
to
other words, the guy that does the voices. So.
redefine. Because one thing we haven't talked about is this success and popularity of conservative talk radio versus the left, who hasn't had much success there. And there's a liberal radio network that's launching.
It's absurd.
Well, how is that going to work? What
First of
advice
all,
would you give them?
This idea of liberal versus conservative talk shows is the most horrific thing that's happened to radio. I don't know how this started. Well, Limbaugh started it by being a conservative. So then there was this reaction. A liberal radio network is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life, you know? So it's not going to work. They don't have broadcasters. Doing a 3-hour radio show, Al Franken is a brilliant guy. I think he's funnier than hell, but he's going to find doing 3 hours every bloody day. There's more to it. So they got to get away from this idea of conservative versus liberal talk show hosts. They have to start to just radio
as a partisan, I say try. One, there's a First Amendment, it might work. 2, spend all your money on it. Sell the hybrid cars.
Well,
put it all into the radio network. Take your best shot.
It is a trifle absurd to start a liberal radio network at this late date. Not that radio is, of course, the most all-encompassing media. I was thinking a liberal Pony Express might be more effective, or maybe a liberal carrier pigeon that can go from house to house and disseminate the good news. Going back to the initial premise of this debate is who's funnier, the right or the left. The fact that Rush Limbaugh is considered humorous by conservatives absolutely defines that the left is always funnier at all times. If your idea of a joke is to call women feminazis and to rail about Hillary Clinton way after the sell-by date, then that's not that fucking funny, my friend. And going back to Gary's point, a satirist has to have a point of view, otherwise they are a bland late-night talk show host who plays all sides against the middle. If you don't have a point of view, then what are you talking about?
I mean, don't you need a certain amount of anger to drive talk radio? And liberals, liberals who heretofore had sort of an NPR conversational tone now have, books like Scumbag, The Lies of Laura Bush, and, I mean, liberals have discovered their ids, so why doesn't this make it a good moment for them to try radio?
Howard Dean yelled, and now, the Volvo has turned. We're coming back, baby.
Since when are they bored with the New York Times?
Because the New York Times is...
and the Boston Globe and CBS. I mean, it's...
New York Times is like reading the Weekly Reader.
Liberals are unrepresented in the media.
They're completely missed the point of how radio works. Radio is just, it is an entertainment medium. And to say,
white guys.
Rush Limbaugh is a conservative, so therefore we have to have liberals, he is an entertaining guy. What do you want to call him? A humorist, a satirist, whatever. He's entertaining to people. And the guy, like, what's funnier than the collar abortion, which I thought was pretty good. He also, made fun of the homeless. He also, he did it at a time when nobody was doing it, and it made it really different. And, I'd like him to bring it back, frankly.
Let me go back to a point you were making. Why do both sides, CBS, New York Times, why do both sides always feel like the mainstream media is misrepresenting them?
Because they do. But no, I'll actually temper it. I find generally the media makes a lot of mistakes: incompetence, stupidity, packed journalism, cheap applause, all the usual kind of problems. I don't think it's as much of a bias ideologically as people on the right often think. I think most people who work in the liberal media are pretty liberal, but I don't think they wake up every day for partisan bias. I think more they just don't get, like the flyover states. I mean, you could do the $1 million prize, walk into the New York Times newsroom and find a pro-lifer. Now, 40-some, depending on how you want to debate the polling percent of America are pro-life, I guarantee they're pretty hard to find in the media elite. So I think it's more of a cultural disconnect than a big partisan liberal bias.
But the farther you get out on the instead.
No. The farther you get out on the cranky side of either left or right. I mean, if Kucinich was here, he'd rant and rave about how his gasoline pill and geodesic dome plan had been totally covered up by the media. And if only people would hear it, he'd win. Nader would go on for hours about this stuff. So would Pat Buchanan. So I think the more you are on the cranky side of the horseshoe, the angrier you get about the media. But fundamentally, I think the problem is much more packed journalism and incompetence.
John?
Well, I think that I wanted to come back to the radio thing because I think that most of conservative talk radio is characterized by people who are angry and who I think that they're not funny, and they don't pretend to be funny, and they don't really try to be funny. And the interesting thing about this new radio network is that their whole lineup is going to attempt to be funny. And I think one of the reasons for that is because conservatives kind of hate the culture. and they're mad about it, and they can't really joke about it. I mean, I think if you think Jerry Falwell, well, Jerry Falwell and
Jesus, I mean, how do you
Jerry
get away with making a comment
Jerry
like that?
Falwell
Nobody
and
says
you know
it.
Pat
I have to
Robertson
say something.
don't
You're full
go
of
on
shit.
television.
Okay.
Phil,
No, really.
Jerry
Conservatives
Falwell and
hate the culture.
well, they hate the dominant
all right,
culture.
Liberals hate the culture. I mean,
Maybe,
what
but
kind of a
they're not
ridiculous
funny.
news?
They can't laugh about it. Jerry, you don't see Jerry Falwell telling jokes or Pat Roberts,
funny?
etc. I don't think they
I don't
find
know,
no
Dennis
humor.
Miller's funny. He's sometimes conservative. I guess
Well,
he's
we're
like,
debating.
Greg, the only thing Greg said, I must be funny to Greg. He's going to laugh at everything I'm saying.
Pat Robinson will just come out and just anything that's fun, he doesn't like it.
He doesn't like it.
You know, the movie's
Those
fun.
guys, I
mean,
agree.
conservative
I agree.
libertarians like the
But you know, you want to talk about the extreme left?
conservative libertarians like the culture. They don't have any problem with hip hop or cursing or sex, but right.
No, you got to be
But,
careful lumping our whole weird little.
It's literally like, you know, everybody.
Robinson's a gas bag.
He's an idiot. I mean, and the far left, probably no left. Is Ralph Nader a funny guy? I mean, he's a real, he's a real cut up, isn't he? He's just a riot. So, I mean, to say that, you know, conservatives hate the culture is like, Ann Coulter walked into my studio one day because she's a fan of mine, so. Anyway, she
What
said,
an illuminating moment that must have been.
I slept with her.
Who hasn't?
She said, everybody except Greg.
I didn't have the money.
She said something. She said something equally stupid. She said that liberals hated America.
Yeah.
And I said, what the hell is that about? Well, they do. You know, Ann's not going to say anything and back off on it. Nothing. Liberals hate their country. It's ridiculous to say that. And I said, I'm a liberal. I truly believe that I am. And she said, because I don't share your foreign policy views, it doesn't mean that I'm not, you know, not a liberal. So I said, that's an absurd thing to say. Well, they do. They hate their country. Liberals hate America. Not only that, they've been trying to destroy America for 60 years. That's the kind of thing that has made talk radio exciting because it is so polarizing and loud and screechy. It's also unfunny. It's also not creative. It's also, and if that's the kind of crap that the liberal radio network's going to engage in, they're going to be playing the same game that conservative radio does, and it's done.
Get huge ratings.
Yeah.
No. Conservative, there's only one guy that gets ratings, and that's Limbaugh. All those other guys die, man.
Including you.
Mike Savage. Dude. You know what?
I'm just making a joke, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
You said the only one who gets ratings was
Only the truth is funny, though, Drew.
Well,
Wait,
I
Phil.
don't know how I'm not perceived as a conservative talk show host. I'm perceived as a
And you
I
are.
think a
I'm
humorist.
going to ride to his
But-
defense. When I first showed up in L.A., a liberal comedian is a genius. Harry Shearer grabbed me and said, "You want to hear the smartest guy on radio? Tune in to a guy named Phil Henry."
He's a liberal.
Radio genius.
Anyway, the only thing I'm trying to say is I think if they do the same thing the conservatives are doing, it's gonna die.
Don't you think it's a mistake when people like say, "Oh, conservatives are Pat Robertson," and then you know liberals are whatever the equal of Pat
Nader.
Robertson? Yeah, it's just crazy because to me, you know, conservative the people that really vote and really call it are just like a shade over, and then the people on the left are a shade over, and there's a lot of common ground. And to say like, "Oh, it's all Pat Rob," and even to cater to people like Pat Robinson, when you make your appointments, like put John Ashcroft in or something like that, it's crazy.
Well, those are the people who vote.
Well, other people vote too, but those are the people who make the noise during the primaries, and those are the people who vote for during the primaries, and maybe those are the people that call in. But people that vote are people right in the middle on one side or the other that have other concerns besides the far concerns on each side. It's a mistake to cater to them.
Yeah, one of the problems we've got is the way the distribution system of politics work. Primaries, few people show up to vote on either side. So the more ideological on each side can dominate. Looney left with the Dems and some of our Robertsonites on the Republican side, though. The truth is, Robertson is so interesting as kind of a threatening clown. He's overwritten as somebody with a lot of influence. He doesn't really have it in the party, not like he used to.
We have a few minutes left, and we wanted to. Do you have a point, Greg?
Well, he was saying Pat Robertson. The story about 2 weeks ago, or what was it, 3 months? Well, whatever time period. Never mind, it's a joke. Pat Robertson said God told him Bush was going to win the next election, and I have trouble believing that God takes Pat's calls on a regular basis. and I agree with what you said, Phil.
He said it would.
That Ann Coulter says things like liberals hate America, and it's those weird blanket statements, but it goes back to what you said about Carey in the beginning. That's why it's anybody but Bush at this point. We're willing to accept that Carey's a flim-flam in order to just eject Bush out of office because I'm so tired of hearing.
With the Democrats,
I know, there needs to be principles.
It's an anti-Bush party.
That's what we got now, Pookie.
Let's
McCarthyism at the level,
You know,
the level of the
A
thing.
new McCarthyism?
Yes, the criticism of Bush is, look, I ran the Keynes
I
campaign.
think we're dangerously getting close to politics as opposed to humor.
No, just the cheap shots and the rhetoric are, I think, unfortunate.
Let's take some questions from the audience for a couple of minutes. I see a hand, but there are microphones somewhere.
I just wanted to ask you what the panel thinks of the impact of Rock the Vote will have on this election, if any.
None. Youth voter turnout has gone down since Rock the
You know
Vote
what Rock the
started.
Vote's good for? Rock the Vote's good if you're in college and you want to get laid, and you want to impress the girl about how smart you are politically, and you take her to a Rock the Vote thing.
And I think you should also take into account that this is a group of white guys with glasses who are rich, so maybe our opinion doesn't cover the entire waterfront.
No, it's a total scam.
Assault weapons. Are you for them too? Assault weapons.
Salt weapons?
Yes.
Salted weapons?
What are we right about now?
Errol Flynn put cocaine on his.
I have an opinion on that because I own 4 guns. I own 2 rifles and 2 handguns. I bought the rifles because the government decided to ban them. And I thought, wow, before the government bans something, I just want to buy it.
What kind of,
Sure I have.
I feel the same way about pornography.
Right on, Steven. That's right. And I think assault weapons is a misnomer, and every weapon is an assault weapon. A rock is an assault weapon. But no, you don't need full auto with 80-round clip to go hunting. You certainly don't need it for home defense either. And I got
It's
no problem.
attitudes like that are why the white-tailed deer is overrunning the East Coast. You try to raise cabbages in New Jersey.
I also think that the NRA has been so vilified because by the they are. But if people follow like some NRA recommendation, I think the NRA would have no. Well, they shouldn't have. If they do, they're crazy. I have no problem with gun locks. I think people that if you have a kid in your home and you don't have your clip empty in a separate place from your gun, or you know where it is, but you have to be really, really safe about these things, and they're not. I never bring my guns out to my friends and go, "Hey, look at my gun." Right. It's locked up in a safe where nobody can get to it except me when I need to, if I need to. And if you're safe about it and have a brain, there's nothing wrong with having illegal guns.
He's not lying. I've begged to see his guns, and he just won't show them to me. Load them up, Drew, and let's go riding.
For all your political fooling around, do you ever find yourself in grave danger? And if so, what do you plan to do about it?
What does that mean?
Grave danger. When I'm interviewing some people on the road, I'm afraid they'll punch me.
I get death threats on a regular basis.
Do you really?
Everybody does. And they come from Greg's house, and what I do is I try to...
You got to read the MASH notes
Well, that's
underneath.
right. No, I look at this postmark, it always says Santa Clarita. Now,
America's not going to get that.
you know what? I walk to my car at night in a garage, by myself, and if a guy wants to kill me, he's going to do it. So I think anybody that sends you death threats is not serious.
Pistol whip his ass.
I'll kick his ass.
I think that one thing that comedians that protects them
Comics
is if
are
they
in
just
trouble.
continue to be funny. If they're making jokes and trying to be entertaining and not, I think one of the things that people on the left got in trouble with when they were protesting the latest war in Iraq was that they, at the moment at which these entertainers should have used what they do best, which is entertain, they stopped and they said, no, I want to make a political statement. And they were vilified and ostracized by the general public because of that. And there's nothing wrong with making a political statement, but if you got to do it with what you do best. You got to continue to be funny.
Staying in your medium, yeah. With Tim Robbins,
Go with what you know. You can't just say, it's wrong, I have a right to say it's wrong, yes, but
Although I'm excited to read Sean Penn's dispatches from Baghdad, I'm sure most preliminary, you know.
The man's daughter was killed. Lay off.
Yeah.
The Streisand memo to the Democrats is a comic channel. Read that sometime.
Okay.
I think the reason people like news from the Daily Show is because the normal news is improv for the seriously uncreative.
Is that a question? Cat will moderate that. Earn your money. You're not being paid, right?
I'm creating no.
But you're doing a fine job.
Matt, you take that.
Well, I think, you know, I mean, the mainstream media tries to be apolitical, and so I think you know, 70 years ago when you lived in any American city and you had 8 newspapers, 4 of them decidedly to the left, 4 of them to the right, you know, you could pick and choose the media you wanted. And, you know, I think that was in many ways sort of a more fruitful era. And, you know, I sort of hope that the rise of Fox News sort of gives rise to, you know, liberal networks and the like. And I don't know. I think one ought to be able to pick and choose their news.
I have a question sort of directly for Phil, but I hope it stimulates some conversation here, which is, how do you reconcile being a liberal who supports Bush when he's speaking out about trying to create an amendment in the Constitution against gay marriage?
I disagree with the president. I agree with the president.
Is that a funny forum for you guys to be speaking about?
I think that the gay amendment would be the first time in the history of our country we've passed an amendment to limit or keep a right away from. Prohibition was, all of us, you know, sort of suffered under Prohibition. Say that figuratively, I wasn't around, but to say, you people there, you don't get to do what the rest of us, that's the first time in the history of our country we would ever do that, and that's a black day. And President Bush, and you know something, now I'll say something in history again, I don't think he's an evil enough man to actually do that. I just don't think, it won't pass. To pass an amendment in this country, it's incredibly hard to get an amendment to the Constitution. You have to have the states ratify all this stuff.
It's a mistake he's making, pandering to that far right, and then it's a thing where he's going to, politicians do it all the time, they say, hey, I'm for this thing, for the one day to get the press conference, and then they drop it. They don't campaign for it.
Hasn't he, over the course of his career, advocated 3 or 4 or 5 different amendments? I mean, it's just flag burning, scroll prayer.
Bad idea.
Look, if there's something in the culture that you don't like, what other option is there, Gary?
Yeah, he's absolutely. It's not like you can go about your day and think that everybody has a right to do what they want.
Bush is right about protecting the sanctity of marriage.
It's just a rhetorical way of saying, I'm really serious about this. I'm willing to tear up the Constitution.
Yeah.
That's how serious I am.
Well, no, they're not going to.
Does anybody on the panel, Mike, do you support?
No, I don't believe in federalizing family law.
But you know, that's the same argument they were given at the time of civil rights. Well, let's kind of leave it at the state level. That's dangerous too. You can't leave those kinds of things to the states. But straight people have done such a great job with marriage.
Yeah, they have. Kobe Bryant and Robert Blake, Britney Spears.
Yeah. Talking about gold standards.
Scott Peterson. We're rocking it out.
Don't you wish that marriage counseling program had been in place before the Britney Spears situation? Really
So
helped.
how come Carey is against gay marriage? Ooh,
I know.
that's gotta hurt. How come? Yeah, he
It's
is.
weak. It's weak and vacillating.
Let's take one more question. They're going to make us leave the room.
You're going to make us leave the room?
Watching
What kind of fascist state is this festival?
Watching a bunch of rich, middle-aged white guys have this discussion on stage may lend to my, actually not a question, but a proposition that I sitting, watching, listening today. It's been a tremendous amount of fun, but I might suggest that we start a national conversation about initiating term limits for humorists and comedians. What do you
I'm in favor of that. I'm still waiting for my TV show. So
Yeah.
as soon as someone
There is one.
Yeah, it's called ratings.
I think you'll find that constitutional amendment's already
It's
passed.
like elections are the term limit that people are at if they want their congressman out. You don't need stupid term limit laws. They have elections for that. They have ratings to get us out.
You know, term limits.
Which is more powerful, comedy or politics?
Politics.
And politics, nuclear weapons are involved.
Peter Cook was once asked if he thought satire had an effect on the politics of a country, and he said, "Oh, absolutely. The greatest satire of the 20th century was the Weimar Cabaret, and they really stopped Hitler."
On that note, Thank you all for coming. It was a great time.
Is that anywhere close to what you
Hey, this is a comedy show, and I'm going to keep making it funny here. Now, let's talk about your wife and daughter getting pistol whipped. Let's reach for a gun.
There is really nothing funnier than your wife or daughter being pistol whipped. I have to agree with Phil on
You know
that
what?
one.
On second thought, I wouldn't reach for a gun. I'd get a video camera.
Yeah. You could reach for a Pop-Tart or a drink as
Something
well.
like that, yeah.
Hey, let's sit back and enjoy this pistol whipping. Hey, what am I... Gosh, I wish I had a gun right now. I wish I'd had the prescience to be a fascist and have a gun.
A fascist, yeah, that's right. Yeah, what the hell? Let my wife die. I don't want to be a fascist.
I'd like to apologize for taking the question away.
Yeah, why the hell did you start?
You were doing a very good job, and I apologize.
I can't get. I'm so tired. Yeah, whoever is puffed up, and Democrats are puffed. A lot of Democrats and liberals are really like self-righteous, and we're here to save you, and they have that vibe going, and that's easy to make fun of because you can knock them down real easy. And so many Republicans are like, oh, we know what's moral, and you don't, and we're going to protect you and your family. You can knock them down real easy because they're so fucking.
Yeah, but you know, isn't comedy mostly about like attacking, you know, the status quo? Isn't comedy it basically have a liberality to it?
Pistol whipping the status quo. I want to get back to that.
Or shooting them while they do
Yeah, exactly. While the status quo is beating your wife and daughter.
I know, but you always want to attack people that are hire you or think they're higher than you.
Right.
So that's a lot of liberals and a lot of conservatives who think
Right.
they're better than everybody else in the country because they're so paternal in their attitudes. So good. I love to knock those people down.
Yeah, I think satire has always been this kind of disorganized resistance to establish power centers. I mean, if you go back a few hundred years, the court jester pulled the king's beard. He didn't go out and randomly criticize the serfs. There was
going town to town, giving crap to the serfs.
Can I ask if the queen was being axe whipped at that point? Or sword whipped or anything like that?
We may be recreating that
this
society.
This is why Dennis Miller, I think, has had trouble getting a little traction. Is that what's he going to do? He's going to go after the Democrats. These guys are so not empowered. That's very amusing. They are so not screwing up the world the way the Republicans are right now. There's no.
I think there's some truth to that. I mean, the bigger you are.
Yeah, but don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. It's coming. It's coming.
Yeah.
Where do we meet Mrs. Carey? I guarantee you, comic goldmine. I agree, actually, with what Drew said. It's equivalent. There's a certain absurdity inherent in all politics. And the closer you get to any politician, you can find just a little tinge of that insanity or weirdness that makes it funny. And when you're in the White House, you're the king of the heat. You're the most interesting person to focus on. And I think satire does have that kind of that interest in challenging those who are powerful. But now that the primaries are over, and we're getting to the real thing, I think there's going to be an elevation of Carey, and I think they'll both be interesting and funny, and they're both easy to make fun of.
Well, let's get specific. What exactly is funny about John Kerry?
The guy is a target-rich environment for comics. I mean, he's so stiff. You sort of picture him sitting at home wearing a powdered wig, watching C-SPAN 2. I mean, he told one of my colleagues at Time that he actually thought of himself as a rebel. I mean, for John Kerry, being rebellious is having red wine with fish. So when he gets elevated, we'll have our shots.
Well, don't you think there would be real parity in this election in that sense? That both these guys.
Yeah. John Kerry doesn't stand for anything. I mean, that's right there. That's mockable. He doesn't stand for a thing. He's just anti-Bush, which is why the Democrats really. I'm so ashamed of my party because it's an anti-Bush party. It doesn't stand for a bloody thing. Now, pistol whipping.
No, the president's war on English. The president's war on English is a fair part.
Yeah, how about that? This is good, yeah. But the John Kerry makeover, you can't beat that. Well, yeah, you can.
But you're right. For Bush to try to shed his patrician roots,
yeah.
So let's start with the obvious question: who's funnier, Drew?
Oh, I think I don't think either one is. I think you just have to make fun of, make sure you're making fun of your targets right and getting laughs. I don't think there is a funnier left or right, honestly. I don't think there's an answer to the question.
Can I follow up on that?
By all means.
Can I just sort of steal it? Do you mean who's funnier to mock or who is funnier at mocking?
To mock. Let's start with to mock.
Who is more mockable?
Yes.
I think the right is more mockable because they're higher status. And, you know, it's always more fun to attack the guy on top. And right now, the Republicans control the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch, so there's hardly another game in town. The only reason anyone's attacking the Democrats is because they're sticking their neck out for the campaign. If there wasn't a political campaign, you wouldn't hear about the Democrats from politicians, from comedians probably at all. Because, well, they're not puffing themselves up.
They're not doing anything.
They're not doing anything.
They're dull.
Well, Phil, jump in.
My microphone's not working. Is it there? They're dull. They're not doing anything.
You support President Bush.
I do, and I'm a Democrat who supports President Bush. But I only support President Bush because, and I'll tell you why.
No booing. No booing.
And I anticipated that response. First of all, I think the Democrats are hysterical. But really, it's not the Democrats. It's sort of the liberal tree hug, whatever you want to call it. They're a riot. I mean, I do a character on my show named Dean Wheeler, who is a real pansy ass when it comes to... First of all, I'm a Democrat who believes that it's okay to own a gun. I think it's in the Constitution that we can. In fact, in the world we live today, you're an idiot if you are a responsible citizen and you don't have a gun in your home. If you are responsible... Why is that a boo? It's in the Constitution. You may have it. You look at your wife or your daughter being pistol whipped in front of your very eyes. You wouldn't reach for a gun?
Okay, Phil. This panel is who's funnier, the left or the right.
You wouldn't reach for a gun?
No.
You know what's great about what Bush does is he makes fun of his own problem. You know, like he does on Saturday Night Live. He makes jokes about it all the time, and right away you forgive it. Right. You know what I mean?
No, right away you forgive it. I think you'll find he's not quite as self-effacing and a man of the people as some people might imagine.
I'm still waiting for Bush to make a self-effacing joke about executing the retarded.
Yeah.
Then I'll really respect
But that's funny. That's funny.
It's not like they plucked a retarded guy off the street and go, "We're going to shoot you." It's a murder.
It's not like they retarded him. It just happened.
The guy was a murderer.
Now, if the retarded person had been a bird, then he would have definitely shot.
Well, when the retarded guy kills somebody in your family, we'll see if you change your tune.
Let me shift.
I'm looking forward to it.
Now, what if a retarded person is
Send him right to Phil's house, eliminate the middleman. Do you know what I mean?
Let me try to bring us back sort of to the subject matter. John Podesta, you were in the White House during the Clinton-Lewinsky period, where late-night comedians were having a field day. Were you watching? Were you able to find humor in this moment? Or were you too close to it?
Well, I actually don't think Letterman and Leno had anything on our 7:45 staff meeting, really, in the morning. And I watched Anderson Cooper get himself really in trouble talking about oral sex yesterday, so I think I'm going to avoid going down that path and just leave it to the imagination. But I think that I'd say two things about it, really. One is having humor in the White House leavened the situation, made people have the capacity to actually go do their job because they could laugh about it a little on the inside. But I do think it robbed the president of something that Drew mentioned with regard to President Bush, which is it robbed him of the ability to use humor. You know, you couldn't go from his grand jury testimony onto Leno and start joking around about it. And so there was a period probably for a year in which I think President Clinton had a harder time actually using humor, which he was so good at during the other parts of his tenure.
It did take away a very important tool out of his toolkit. He just had to stop. It was impossible for him to, as you say, go on any of these shows and make fun of himself. And this is, that's what those clips that we just looked at were all about, is these guys trying to buy themselves some immunity.
But for comedians, can anything match the Clinton era in terms of material?
I think the assassination of John Kennedy was a gold mine. And From there, we have civil rights, Vietnam, Nixon, please.
We also had Dan Quayle at one point, and that was fairly fresh. I'll tell you, you can recycle those Dan Quayle jokes and make them W jokes, and it's awesome. How come we allow obviously, it was so funny that Clinton had a sexual incident, and that was endlessly entertaining, and yet all the things that Bush has done, people go, hey, you still have to respect the office and all that. I hear that all the time. And crowds go, ooh, if you make fun of
What
him.
did he do?
Sorry?
What did he do?
George W. Bush, aside from deceiving...
Other than go to war? What?
Oh, other than go to war?
I'm a big fan, as you know.
Other than pistol
I'm a huge fan of violence.
Pistol whipping the Iraqis.
Matt, you were going to say something.
You bring up guns and everybody's like scared. Come on.
Not in Colorado, they're not.
That's good. Apparently these people are.
Matt,
I think
Cooper.
we'll all concede there's nothing as funny as pistol
Are you doing an
whipping.
impression?
By the way, Campbell, you are lovely.
So
Why did I call on you?
I think President Clinton should have just claimed that having sex with an intern was a joke. And just said, don't you get it? I had sex with an intern in the Oval Office. It's hilarious. I guess I'm just too hip for the room.
Where was Stephen when we needed him?
Mike Murphy,
Yes.
you have advised and worked for natural performers, Schwarzenegger,